So, hi Eliot, great to have you here. Congratulations, congratulations on your new book.
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to reconnect with you guys, and thank you for congratulations on the launch. I'm really excited to have it in front of readers.
Fantastic. So, second book in the Uncommon Stock series. Just to give a bit of background, we did a first interview with you that we transcribed a few months ago, where we covered essentially, well, everything around how you decided to become an author, how you deal with the creative process of writing, how you work with your editor, and then what FG Press has done for you, and how you see the future of publishing. So we might get into these subjects again a little bit, but I'm going to try to explore new ones.
Sounds great. Yeah, I mean, you guys always ask the big questions, so they're always fun to talk through.
Thank you. So about the launch today, apart from granting us this great interview, what are you doing for the launch?
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to line up a bunch of fun stuff. So, you know, book launches are interesting because, and I think they're particularly interesting for fiction because it's not actually obvious what a book launch should be. Many authors and aspiring authors, or just readers, sort of assume that if you work with a big publisher, they have a big marketing plan ready for you, and maybe you'll have like billboards on the subway, and and maybe you'll be in a private jet flying around the country to different bookstores to do book signings and stuff like that. And I mean, obviously that doesn't really happen. But I mean, even the more the less sort of over-the-top versions often don't happen or don't work very well. I had a friend who published a major business book this year, and they had a lot of traditional marketing behind the book. Their publisher put a lot of, actually had billboards and stuff like that. And they were frustrated. They felt that wasn't really reaching new readers. And with nonfiction, it's a little different, but with fiction, it's actually pretty simple. And the way that I try to think about our launch efforts, and then I try to work with my publisher, who's an independent publisher, FG Press, to think about launch efforts, is actually from the reader's perspective. Yeah. It's very tempting to sort of think about it from the publisher's perspective, and that equally applies to the author's perspective, or if you're self-publishing, or maybe using Readsy as a platform to publish your next book. To think through it, like, how would I want to get the word out, right? But that doesn't work very well, because really what you need to think about is why do readers, check out new books in the first place? Because those are the people you're trying to reach. And I know that for me, like, I'm a voracious reader. I read dozens and dozens of books a year, right? Like many, many books a year. And especially for fiction, usually the way that I discover a new author, a new series, a new book is because someone recommends it to me, right? I mean, it's really straightforward. It's like a friend says, "Hey, Eliot, I just read X, and you would really like it, so you should probably check it out," right? And I do the same. If I read a book I really like, and I have a friend who I think would get a kick out of it, I let them know. I'm like, "Oh, I just read this book. It was great." Like a couple books I've been recommending this year are Whiskey Tango Foxtrot by David Schaefer, which was great. The Martian by Andy Weir. The Magicians by Lev Grossman, which I just got into, even though it was released in 2009. And because that's how so many readers discover new books, when we think about what to do, like what a book launch even means, aside from just like allowing people to buy it like through normal distribution channels, like we try to think about it from that point of view. So, for example, this conversation is great because there are people who follow Readsy and who are interested in becoming independent authors, or what it means to be an independent author, author and the conversations that you have about the stories that those people write. And so if they get a kick out of this conversation, maybe they're going to go check out Uncommon Stock, right? Yeah. We're also doing things that are a little unusual. So, actually, this bears mentioning, because today, Uncommon Stock version 1.0, which is the first book in the series and came out this March, is actually free on Amazon. So if you are listening to this interview today, it is free today, tomorrow, and Friday. So December 3rd through 5th. So you can check out the story for free, see if you like it, and if you get a kick out of it, do me a solid, write a review, and buy the sequel. So we're, that's a fun experiment that we're doing. But in addition to that, over the past, I guess 6 weeks now, we've been releasing the entire first book serially on Medium, which is a sort of a new blogging platform. And we broke the book up into 10 parts, and we've been releasing each part along the way. So you can follow the story. One new part comes out per week. So I guess right now we're about to release part 6. And so basically by the end of the year, the whole book will be available for free if you want to read it on Medium forever. I mean, you can just cycle through and read each part. And I think you actually started reading it there, isn't that right?
It's exactly right, yeah. And I think it's very interesting because there's a lot of controversy even within independent publishing around giving away your book for free.
Yes.
So it's really fantastic to see a publisher encouraging authors to do that, basically.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and like that controversy is, bears debate. I mean, it's not a no-brainer to make. Some people are like, oh, you make something free and then everybody wants it, and actually that's like sometimes the opposite, right? Like, people want things because they have value, and so if for some reason they see it being free, that might connote to them that it doesn't have as much value, right? Like, if it's worth something, shouldn't I be paying for it? Like that mentality. And that's actually why we did not make the book free permanently on Amazon. We do have this, like, we're celebrating the launch of the sequel, so we're doing these free days, right alongside it. So that's why you can get it for the next 3 days. But on Medium, it's different because you're not actually like buying a book and getting it for free or downloading a book and getting it for free. You're just accessing a serial through their platform. And the expectations that readers bring to Medium are very different than the expectations that they bring when they're browsing on Amazon. And so that's why we chose to experiment with it that way. But I was very surprised. I think most publishers, both majors and indie, would balk at in any way of giving a book for free. And so I was very pleased when FT Press agreed to do it as an experiment.
No, that's great. That's great. I love it. That's why I started indeed reading it on Medium, and I said to myself, okay, I'm going to do the experiment till the end and read it on Medium. Well, I think that great intention lasted a couple of chapters or 3. And then I wrote the book, so it definitely works.
There we go. That's good. I guess next time we'll have to do like the Netflix version, right? Like just so you can binge read. Yeah. I mean, we're doing some other fun things that you might get a kick out of for launch and that might be interesting to your listeners or to other authors. So, like, I always think it's sort of fun to play. So the books, Uncommon Stock, both version 1.0 and Power Play, they're a startup thriller series. So they're an adventure story about 2 college students who drop out to start a new tech company, and their product is called Mosaic, and it's actually like spell check for financial fraud. So they can, basically they can look at a bank's data and tease out where there might be fraud schemes or money laundering schemes, and they get caught up in this whole conspiracy, and it goes downhill from there, right? And so what was sort of fun is when the first book came out, we did a few things, like we actually created a real website for the fictional startup, and I think we talked about this in our previous interview a little bit. A major venture capital fund issued like announced that they were investing in this fake startup on April Fool's Day, right? So we did some like fun things to try to blur the line between fact and fiction, because the book plays a lot between fact and fiction, right? Like there's a lot of real tech and startup content in there, even though it's really a thriller. And so, for example, this week there's actually Mara, who is the protagonist and CEO in the book, is actually being profiled on tech.co. So she has like a CEO like interview profile coming up. So like that's fun. And those are, that's an example of what we're trying to do. Yeah. And I mean, the idea, right, is that if you've read the book, if you're a fan of the books, that's fun, right? Like you get a kick out of reading that, and it might like remind you about them and get you excited. And maybe when you're going to have a cocktail later on that day, you might mention it to a friend, right? And so that's sort of the word of mouth engine that we're trying to spark. Yeah,
no, I mean, and one thing I loved also is, I think we did this in April, something like that, is along with the press release, like a fake press release from the Foundry Group investing in Mosaic, the landing page for Mosaic also, which I think is just a brilliant idea. So I think there's a lot of cool stuff to do around the book launch, and I think like your previous experience as an entrepreneur and entrepreneur in residence for a VC firm might have given you some ideas for the book launch, because I mean it's almost like launching a new feature when you're in a startup, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so there's I'm forgetting the name of an author that I want to reference. Her last name is Rush, Rusch, and she actually wrote a great book on this subject called Discoverability. So if you're an author, especially of fiction, thinking about these issues, that's a good one to reference. But I like the way she puts it, and that is that when you're writing, like when you are in the midst of writing a book, again, fiction or nonfiction, it's art. Like that's what it is, and you shouldn't try to let how you think about marketing or promotion or any of that stuff influence the art you're trying to make, to craft, right? And so, so when you're in the writing process, that's all it's about. Just write something that's true to you, that's true to your ideal reader, and that really speaks to something, whether it's for entertainment, whether it's for inspiration, whether it's for education, whatever it is that's really behind what you're doing. But once you've written a book, once the book is written, it's now a product.
Yeah.
Right? And so then the question becomes one of business model and strategy and understanding market dynamics and understanding your customers, who are your readers, right? And then finding ways to engage them, to connect with them, and to share the story with them. And so, yeah, definitely my sort of previous work and current work in startups and in venture capital has certainly influenced the way that I sort of look at that equation. And like one of the funny and sort of counterintuitive ways that I think it shapes that is that when you work, like when you work in startups, and I'm sure you know this, it can be very tempting, especially when you're really at almost the aspirational stage of like, oh, I have an idea and I want to like turn it into a business. It's almost tempting to try to temper your thoughts or shape your strategies based on what you can find out there in the world. So you go on the internet and like you read 100 blog posts about your sector, and you read all the industry reports, and you read what all the competitors are doing and how they're positioning themselves, and like you do all this stuff, and then you try to like allow that to inform what you're doing, and often it doesn't matter. Like all that information, you can easily drown in it, and it rarely actually helps. And part of that's because if you actually start a business that has legs, you're not trying to fit in with the competition. Like your approach will be different enough that if it works, like you'll displace them. So it becomes a non-issue. I think that competitive analysis and that kind of stuff is much more relevant once you're a more mature, established business than it is important to understand. But for authors who are just starting to get their books out into the marketplace, remember that you're a startup, right? Like your book is a startup. Your book is your first product, and you're a startup. And so when you do that, it's, like, again, there are so many blogs about launching books and marketing books and understanding publishing and the whole process. And I think that it's really easy to fill your head with hot air. I know I've done it time and again. And at the end of the day, when the rubber meets the road, it's really just about like expressing yourself and helping to share the story in whatever way you would find interesting. And like if you put yourself in the reader's shoes, that's pretty much all you need to do. And I've met very few authors who aren't readers, and usually they're like serious readers. And so you already have all the market information you need. Like, you are a potential customer. And so if you think about it from that perspective, you can sort of skip the skip a lot of that sort of like research process, I guess, and just go straight into it. Because I mean, like, for example, like having an interview with the fictional CEO who's the protagonist of my book, like I did not read that on a marketing blog, right? Like we were just like, that sounds like it could be fun. Like, why not?
No, definitely. I think there's a lot of room to experiment in book marketing. Not enough authors are doing it because, well, the number one reaction for a lot of authors is go on the internet, Google book marketing, maybe hire someone, and not let the creativity that they had writing the book kick in and help them actually market it. And so it's definitely very important to get this message across and saying, well, the best marketing techniques in publishing have yet to be discovered, I think. And
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. And I think that you're right. I think a lot of authors view not just marketing, but almost a lot, like even the book production process, as this black box, right? It's almost like, oh, I've written my story, and that's it, right? And the funny thing is that those authors are extremely intelligent and creative, and if, as you say, if they applied that creativity to the production and marketing process or whatever, they would be in the top 1% of people doing that stuff, right? So I think that that's sort of the silver lining, right? Like there is a lot you can do if you just think about it. And like there's sort of this annoying middle ground where when folks go out and hire people for help with book marketing, like there are very, very few people who are worth the money. Like very few people. Like, and arguably none, depending on the kind of book you're releasing, right? And so, but the tricky part is that they don't tell you that. They don't say, oh yeah, you shouldn't hire me, right? So like there's an enormous amount of sort of sales material online, and like when you talk to them, they'll make you feel like they're going to send you to the top of the New York Times bestseller list, and usually, even if it's not intentionally disingenuous, it's just that's not how books get successfully marketed, right? So I think that if you think it's a black box and then someone tells you they know how to do it, it's very tempting to say, great, like let me hire you. But you'll learn very quickly after you do that probably you're going to be the one driving it no matter what. And I think that's true whether you're publishing through Readsy, whether you're publishing for Random House, whether you're completely self-publishing and hiring all your own freelancers independently. Like, the author drives most of the marketing for almost any book, even if they don't want to. And so, it's something that you might as well get creative with, because then at least it'll be fun.
Exactly. No, I think, and most of the successful authors we see out there, they have fun doing the marketing. I mean, you interviewed Joanna Penn. I hang out on air, and I see her at a lot of conferences, and conferences are a way for her basically to get her message across and market herself or her blog or her advice, and she always has fun doing it. So I think lots of others see marketing as a hustle when it should be seen as something to experiment with, something to be creative with, and exactly as you're doing. No.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like one of those things where, and I think Joanna does this phenomenally well. Like, she's found a sort of a niche where her message is also relevant, right? So that's why people want her to speak at those conferences. And people do it in different ways. Like, Hugh Howey does it by, like, writing a lot about the publishing industry,
Yes.
right? And, like, a number of other people do that as well. And you're going to attract different people by writing about that. But, you know, like, here's an example of something fun, right? Like, I was recently in Boulder to visit with FG Press, and we did we recorded a series of video interviews where I just like spent 20 minutes talking to each member of their team about like what they did to make the book a reality. So, for example, like I talked to their editorial director about like the editorial process for the book, what it looked like behind the scenes. We talked to the cover, their designer about like the typography and the cover design, and it was sort of interesting. Like the cover design, the cover it's a top-down still life photo of a laptop with a cappuccino and a book and a handgun on a table, right? So it looks pretty cool. I'm really happy with it. And that was our concept. And FG Press actually did the shoot. Like they did the photo shoot. Oh. The CEO has like these crazy. He's like an amateur photographer, so he has like a really good camera. And so they got a gun, and they're in Boulder, which is this like nice little mountain town, little sort of bubble town, right? And so they went to the different coffee shops around the office, but none of the coffee shop owners would allow them inside with the gun to take the picture, understandably, right? Like, why do you want a handgun in your coffee shop? So this was like a huge problem, and they're like, oh my God, because they wanted to have the ceramic cup with a cappuccino in it. And like, when you have a nice cappuccino from a coffee shop, they have like latte art, in the top. Yes. And so if they couldn't bring the gun to the coffee shop, how could they bring the cappuccino to the gun without the latte art degrading, right? So then they like had this whole system and like rushed it over to their office and like had it all set up and like we're taking the photos. So it's like, it's cute, right? And it's actually like really interesting. And they redid the cover for version 1.0 as well. And you'll notice that it has it has sort of like these leaves in the background. It's also a top-down still life, and there's a knife and a backpack and some burning paperwork. So that burning paperwork are real term sheets from Foundry Group that they actually issued to Mosaic per that press release, right? And they went outside, they were on the street in Boulder, like with this whole setup. They collected leaves from all over the neighborhood and like made this whole setup. And then they were burning the term sheets under the camera and like taking, many photos to make sure that they got a good one. And like people are stopping and like looking up, like, what the hell are you doing? You're like burning paperwork on the street. Like, this is super weird, right? And so like there are these interesting sort of like background stories that if you read the book, I mean, like you're just gonna look at it and be like, oh, that's a cool cover, hopefully, right? And then you read it, you'll be like, oh, that's a cool book. Well, if you liked the book, like it might be fun to know that background story, that like behind the scenes, the DVD extras. And so, now we're going to be able to share those videos. Now, like, you could call that marketing, but like, I mean, that's not how it felt. It didn't feel like we were trying to sell someone. We were just like, this is a funny story. Like, let's talk about it.
No, definitely. And I've heard of something similar, like they intentionally cut scenes from their book, and well, also because the scene wasn't maybe necessary or something different, and they released the scene afterwards, a few months after the book's there, to keep engagement, and I think that's very important. But a great thing now for you is like for this second launch, you already have kind of an established reader base, thanks to the efforts you did on the first book. So how does that change things? You can do much more like, soft marketing, just encouraging word of mouth, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, there were actually sort of a number of dynamics that changed that should be obvious, but I hadn't really been thinking about. Like, for example, like even in the creative process of writing the second book, it felt very different than writing the first, because writing the first, like, nobody cares.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's just you. But writing the sequel, you know, I was, okay, so this is interesting too. So here's a little inside tidbit for you, right? So we released the first book, and during editorial, I had actually started working on a new book that had new characters, a new storyline. I knew that Uncommon Stock was going to be a trilogy, but I thought, oh, like, I'll write another book in between, right? You know, like, before I work on book 2. Seemed fair enough, and like, from the creative side, it's sort of like fun to mess around with new things so you can experiment. But once we released book 1, we had so many Amazon reviews that said, like, when is book 2 coming out? Right? Like, when do I get it? You know, I talked to a few friends who are authors, and they're like, look, man, like, you've got to release the sequel, because, like, this is a series, and, like, people are going to be really annoyed, right? Like, if you go off in all these different directions, like, they want to know about, like, they care about their characters and their story, not your creative process in that sense, right? So I was like, oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, that's true. So I started writing book 2, and then you feel like you're writing more for an audience, right? Because there are these people that want it. So it's a bit of a different dynamic than with the first book, where it was just me and my computer. And that's true on the launch end too. So here's something that, I don't know, I feel like every author should do, especially if you're writing a series, and I don't know how many others do it. But I went on Goodreads, which is like a book review platform, and also on Amazon, and both of those sites obviously allow users, like readers, to write their own review of the book. And on Goodreads, you can actually message the people who wrote reviews or rated your book, right? And on Amazon, you can't do that, but you can comment on their review.
True.
So, right, so you can comment on the review. So I went through, and for every reviewer who liked the book, right, and I messaged or commented them, and I said, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on the book. You know, as a writer, that really makes my day, right? Because I get feedback from people, and clearly you're getting into the book, something connected, like, that's amazing, that's a really magical feeling. So thank you so much for sharing that, and if you're interested, I'd like to thank you by offering you a free advanced review copy of the sequel, because you've already proven that you liked it enough to write a review, like the first book enough to write a review, right? So, like, that might be a cool thing for you, like getting a message from the author, like offering you an early version of the sequel that nobody else can get, right? Like, that's pretty neat. And I was shocked. I mean, like, we had like our conversion rate of, like, you know, the number of people who responded to that was extremely high. It was like most of the people that I messaged then emailed me back saying, please send me a review copy. So I'm hoping that now that they've read, so now they have the review copies, they've read them, and so hopefully when the book comes out, you know, they'll write another review, and hopefully they'll mention it to their friends and stuff like that. So they're sort of an example of how it's, you know, book 2 is a little different on the word of mouth side.
Yeah, no, I actually saw that on the reviews of your book. I saw that each one had a comment.
Oh.
I read the comments. And I wondered, what's the conversion rate? So it's really amazing to see that you have such a good conversion rate on that, because it's...
Yeah, I was shocked, actually. I was expecting it very low, because especially with Amazon, right? Like,
exactly.
I don't even know if you wrote a review and someone comments on it. Do you even know, right? Like, I didn't know if it worked that way. And so I was shocked. I mean, most of the people who got that message followed up and asked for a copy.
Amazing. Well, okay, one last quick question to finish. So I've been among the lucky ones to get an advanced review copy, and well, one thing that I noticed, because I read a lot of independently published books, it's that often in the first series of an author, book 2 is way better than book 1 in terms of writing. And in your case, well, I don't see that huge of writing difference. Certainly, because it's been.
That doesn't speak well to my development of craft, right?
Not what I meant.
I'm just giving you a hard time.
Yeah. I've gone under the whole like editing process of a traditional, more or less, publishing company. So it was already well written. But do you feel like that you've gotten better from the first book to the second one? Has like the process with your editor changed? And do you get new ideas? How are things different?
Yeah, they were actually very different. So that's a good question. So I think that maybe because obviously you're seeing the final result of both processes, so it's actually comforting to hear that there was a high level of quality for them. But the actual editorial process behind both was substantially different. So for the first book, I did like 7 major revisions.
Okay.
Like serious major revisions. I worked with multiple tranches of beta readers, a developmental editor. I did a lot. Like the first rough draft of that book was quite different from the last draft of that book. And that took a long time, and that took an enormous amount of effort. And I learned a lot along the way. So, for example, my developmental editor, Shannon Ballone, she used to be a developmental executive in Hollywood. So she actually brought sort of the film perspective to the table for storytelling, which I found really interesting because it has a lot of structure and pacing and stuff like that, right? And my writing is like the opposite. I don't outline it at all. I have I just sit down and write. So it was really useful to have that as a counterbalance. And that really shaped how I started approaching the second book. So with the second book, when I finished the rough draft, there are far fewer changes between the rough draft and the final draft you just read. So it's actually much, much closer. I went through 3 revisions. They were I made substantial changes, but they were much, much less structural. I wasn't deleting major sections of the book and moving around everything and having to rewrite. It was more fine-tuning. And there were some things that changed, both based on her feedback and on my beta readers' feedback, which was fantastic, and on obviously FG Press's editorial team. So that was really helpful, but it was a much more streamlined process. And so I think that some of the lessons on the creative side that I drew from working through those 7 revisions on the first book were sort of starting to get oriented vis-a-vis where I was in the story and where the characters were in the story, and to make sure there's that good balance of development and action and that kind of stuff. And so I think we got there at the end of the day with book 1, but book 2 we got there much earlier in the day. Yeah. So that was helpful. And I've already drawn lessons from book 2 that I'm applying as I start to work on book 3.
Cool, fantastic. Well, thanks very much for the marketing advice. Congratulations again on the launch of book 2 and on the quality of the series so far. And I hope to be able to host you again for book 3.
I would love that. Yeah, no, thanks again for having me on the show. It's always a pleasure to talk to you guys. I love what you're doing at Readsy, and I think it's a great way to empower independent authors and their readers everywhere. So yeah, just as a quick reminder, if you go check out the Amazon page for version 1.0, it's free today through Friday. And Uncommon Stock Power Play is, available today. So I look forward to getting your feedback on it and to getting book 3 out to readers.
Exactly. Or read book 1 on Medium.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we can do that. Maybe we can include that in the show notes.
Yes, thank you very much.
For sure. All right, bye-bye.